Hi everyone. Thanks for
Hi.
joining. We're coming from very different hours, all of us. I think Shweta is in India, Vinod, Umesh, Toma, and me are in California. Hoeteck is in Boston, and Zvika is in Israel. So I don't know who wins. Who's got the largest gap? Maybe Israel?
Shweta, I think.
Yeah. How many hours?
12 and a half.
Ah, big time. Okay, great. So my first question is that the last time we saw each other, I guess, live was about 3 or 4 weeks ago for some of you. And I was wondering if we could just go quickly around the table. Maybe I'll do it according to my screen. And everybody just tell me how things unfolded when you left Berkeley, how have the last weeks been, and then we'll go on to the questions about research resilience. So Shweta, you start.
Yes. Well, so Simons was going fantastic. And then this thing started happening. I guess in the beginning, I was looking at it more like I was, in this wait and watch mode. I was waiting to see how things would unfold. But then it all happened very, very quickly. So suddenly we stopped going to office, and then a couple of days later there was the shelter in place thing, and then a few days after that the Indian government announced that all the airspaces will close down. So basically within the day we decided to leave and left. So it was really very, very, everything was very, very fast. And yeah, I mean, I'm back here now, and we're doing everything remotely. So yeah, that's about what I have to say.
Yeah, so I unfortunately had to leave earlier than planned. I mean, the time in Simons was great, but yeah, under the circumstances, I had to head back, and I went back and went into 2 weeks of isolation at home. And by the time that was over, I guess everybody else was also directed to stay at home. So I guess everybody just sort of joined us in isolation. So that's the way the situation is. It is good to be in a sort of familiar place, sort of at home, and trying to maintain routine life as much as possible under the circumstances, work from home and so forth.
I'm kind of curious. I mean, the two of you didn't mention it, but how do you eat? Because that's a dramatic question, in terms of getting supplies. I mean, what happens in India?
So,
I mean, you go to the store, does somebody go for you? What's the?
Yeah, so we have been in strict quarantine. We're not supposed to step out of the house. So since I, got from the airport back home, which in itself was a low probability event that I was very grateful for. But, we got back home, my husband and I, and we haven't stepped out since. So essentially our neighbors and friends have been helping us out. They leave stuff at our doorstep and send us a message or ring the doorbell, and that's how we've been managing. And by the way, I have to say that we're really getting spoiled. I mean, I could really get totally used to this. Like, you're sitting at home, there's groceries coming in, cooked food coming in sometimes. So it's really, that's how we eat. I think overeating might be a problem in this case.
And in Israel, it's all deliveries?
Yeah, so there's delivery services, but those actually getting pretty overloaded. I guess that's probably a phenomenon around the world now. So some of these things, you don't get everything that you ordered, or things are sort of delayed for a very long time. And yeah, we've also been getting a lot of help when we were in isolation from friends and from family, sort of to bring the things that we could not get via delivery. And again, we try to do as much as possible to just get everything delivered, and only do things in a different way when it's absolutely essential.
So Hoeteck, I think I'm going by the geographical distance from Berkeley.
Yeah, hi. So I was supposed to arrive at Berkeley about a week before the workshop started, so around mid-March, and then staying till the end of May. So I was very much looking forward to arriving from Boston, and then I later realized that I have to have to cancel on the travel plans. But I'm very happy with how the workshop worked out, and I think most of us have been able to keep up with research over Zoom and email and everything else. In terms of food, it was interesting. I started worrying about not having toilet paper, and then I started worrying about not being able to buy frozen vegetables. And then the last crisis I had was not being able to buy chili sauce. But in the meanwhile, I've learned basically how to use every single kitchen appliance that we have at home. So things are going great.
Thomas, I think you're in Southern California, right?
Oh, I'm here. I'm still here.
It's still Berkeley.
Yeah. So my timing was like very marginally better than Hoeteck's. I was really looking forward to come because I couldn't come the first 2 months because I was still teaching at home. And then I made it just exactly 3 weeks ago. And that was just enough to spend like 2.5 days in the Simons building, which I very much enjoyed. And then I was ordered to stay home. And so I could have driven back down, but the place I'm staying at here in Berkeley has the advantage that it's up in the hill. And so there's all the hiking paths in Tilden Park. And so that's one of the few things that is not yet banned. And so I'm just enjoying that from here. I'll just go back down whenever I want to go back down.
Vinod?
So we decided to stay on at Berkeley, and I spent the last week organizing the workshop, co-organizing the workshop with these 3 amazing people. And you know, I really enjoyed the fact that it was a half-day workshop. I was a little skeptical about it at the beginning because it gave me time to think, reflect back on the talks, so even watch them again and think about it. That was very helpful. Research is going as usual. Everything happens on Zoom. I don't really see a difference. Although one has to take the effort to reach out a little bit more and sort of, you know, be sort of punctual with respect to, you know, appointments, something that I could get used to.
That must be hard for you.
I've actually grown up significantly since my graduate student days. So
it's hard for me, but I'm doing it. Anyway, we could talk a little bit more about the research. I was just sort of wondering, sort of a quick round about how people personally, you're here with a baby too.
Far more time with my 10-month-old daughter, who is both very delightful and very challenging at the same time. My wife is spending, you know, the month writing a haiku a day. So that's a new project that we started because of the, you know, time we're spending together. So yeah, it's good.
And Umesh?
Well, you know, as people were leaving, you know, 2.5, 3 weeks ago, I was sort of rushing to get in meetings with them, you know, and people were leaving at an increasing rate. And then about a week ago, I was thinking, well, a whole week has gone down in this lockdown and I've got absolutely nothing done during the week. And since then, over the last week, it seems like I've been constantly on Zoom, either for the workshop or for research meetings, or for some administrative meetings. But it feels like there's, you know, my days are longer than they were when we used to go into work.
So I guess I'm the last one. I live, I think, a stone throw away from Umesh. It really is a stone throw away. And I guess you have to be a good shot. It's for me, it's very unusual. I travel a lot, and this is not just not traveling, but it's sitting in the same house. So I find it somewhat maddening. I take a lot of walks. I think that's the only rescue. And in terms of food, you know, it's like this continuous debate. It was the beginning, do you go into the store for how long? And then do you stay outside of the store? Do you touch the cup? Do you clean the credit card? Do you disinfect your phone? These minutia, which people have kind of raised to a level which I find it hard to believe is at the end that important, but who am I to say? I have been wrong all along about all this. So I'm doing my best. So, which brings me to my next question, and that is, as I admitted, about a month ago, I was still optimistic that all our programs were going to be run as usual, and just people were you know, extremely worried or anxious by nature would decide to leave. But I was dispelled big time. Actually, I think I have no problem with admitting that I was wrong, and I definitely was wrong on this one. And in any case, at the time we had questions about Simons. What do we do? Do we cancel the whole program? Do we delay workshops? Do we cancel workshops? Do we shorten them? And I think we had a very lively discussion with differing opinions, and I think they're all represented on the screen. At the end, I you know, think that, in my opinion, we've reached the right conclusion, in the sense that we didn't delay, so people didn't have time to kind of sulk and just detach, and they were still in the mode that they were in the program. And we did run the workshops. There was right now the quantum workshop, last week the lattices, albeit in a different form. So my second question is really, how do you feel about this adaptation? And you know, any thoughts, any things that you would like to say about this nature of having to kind of change your mind, say, okay, let's do it differently, let's go at it and do it? Anybody?
Maybe I can go first. So I was sort of the chair for the workshop that was just about to happen. This is the one where we really weren't sure whether, you know, it's going to happen physically at all, or in what form, and so on and so forth. And I also have to admit that I was at the other extreme of Shafi. I was one of the more cautious and pessimistic ones. And so I think it was great that we had all these discussions with the different viewpoints. And, you know, I think really the breakthrough came from my co-organizers coming through and having this great idea to have sort of this 3 to 3.5 hour workshop days spread over 5 days, so to solve all the problems, addresses all the issues about maybe whether people will be able to concentrate, time zone issues, and so on and so forth. So maybe I'll let them talk about how they felt about it and how they came up with this idea.
Well, I don't think it was just us. I think this idea just arose in the discussions, and it worked out really, really great. So, you know, we had this half day per day workshop. And like Vinod said, one thing is that it gives you a chance to sort of, you know, soak in the talks and think more about them. The other thing is that with different time zones, like I'm in India, that's about 12 hours away, it still made it possible for me to attend. So, you know, I was attending from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. thereabouts, but it was still something that was doable at least for a week. So I think that it's really fantastic that, you know, this happened, like we did it like this. I'm really glad that we did not cancel or, you know, postpone indefinitely. As you know, we went through many of these options many times, and it wasn't clear what was the right thing to do. But then we went with this gut feeling that let's just keep going, and you know, let's just do our best while we keep going, right? And I think that it worked out pretty well. Like the workshop went very well. There were lots of participants, and it was great overall.
Anybody else?
I think so there was a question of, so the aspect that we had to consider was, one was the venue, and then there's also the availability of speakers and the audience. Yeah. And well, part of it is sort of hard constraints. Maybe people need to travel, maybe people need to have different time zones and so on. I think another major issue was whether people actually feel like attending a workshop at a time like
yeah,
this.
that's right.
Something that we weren't really sure how it's going to turn out. And the way it turned out, and what we learned, is that a lot of people are actually feeling very happy about research and science life going on, even in this sort of difficult time. Do everything in our power in order to sort of maintain this research routine as much as we can, even under the circumstances. So in that respect, I think we also learned some technique that worked very well in this type of situation.
So just to sort of build on what Zvika said, we spoke to several people, especially the young people were so how should I say it, stoked about the program, you know, and then the workshop, and I think we did a good thing to sort of keep it going, although in a different format. It really doesn't matter. They were all very happy that that it happened, and they actually pitched in as sort of session chairs, sort of the community pitched in as not just the organizers, people from the broader community. They sort of helped out with various things, including the attendance, and questions and so forth, and that was really it was really good to see.
Let me just add something about the lattice, and then we'll move on to the quantum workshop about how that's going. But I do feel that because it was thinking about, because everybody could participate at all hours. It wasn't like I'm only coming on Wednesday, so my talk has to be on Wednesday, and so forth. The way that things were organized were topic specific. So the first day was homomorphic encryption, second day was obfuscation, then it was protocols, cryptanalysis, or maybe it was a reverse order. And that was great, because you really got sort of a rundown of a particular field, and people built on top of each other. And that was because they could participate on every day. And you asked them to do it on Monday, they did it on Monday, and so forth. So that was positive. Another thing I thought about the lattice group, which made this possible, which might be true about quantum, but we'll hear from you guys in a minute, is that it's a very, it feels like a very cohesive group, that a lot of people know each other, and the young people are postdocs and students of people that maybe were in the program, which meant that they came together. So there was, it wasn't like, well, no, maybe. There was a way to kind of, not exactly pressure, but kind of support each other and say, okay, let's do it. And I think that was very useful. And this in my opinion, both semesters are very much this way. It's a strong group, knows each other at the midst of a lot of research that's going on. So it's very live, and therefore these workshops could happen, so right at the drop of a hat. And I guess what you said about the mood, I know there was this discussion about mental health, and people might be depressed, and it will take them time to recover. I don't know. My feeling is that might, the more time goes, that's more true. But that's my feeling, that's my own feeling. And it looks like, at least right now in the first 2 weeks, people were still energetic. And then just on a personal note, for me, it was so useful. I actually found out some new things to work on just from looking at these talks.
Actually, I want to add this little point here that empirically, I think what we found was that even though everybody is obviously disturbed by the situation, but people really looked at this as something very positive. They were seeking a sense of normalcy from the fact that this was still happening. And the general vibe that I got from everybody that was participating was extremely positive. Like, everyone seemed really happy and upbeat that they were part of this. So that was really very rewarding for all of us.
Yeah, certainly. I think special thanks again to our speakers, because we basically had to shuffle their talks around at the last minute, and all of them were always very positive about it, and and they all gave really good talks. And then the other committee was great too. After the first day, we got a lot of emails from people saying everything's going well, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. And like Vinod also mentioned, wider committee stepping up to help us chat sessions, manage questions, and so on and so forth.
How about the quantum workshop going and the whole transition in the quantum program? You guys want to speak about it?
I think it was it's good to remember what the context was, just to because these things really happen. There was a week, which is, for me, it's the week that I arrived here, where every single day was a new week or a new month, or so it was completely unclear what was going to happen the next day, and the next day, the previous day, seemed like a wholly different era that was gone. And so in this kind of context, it's really hard to make plans as to a workshop. There's so many other things on your mind that it's really hard to put energy into the organization of an event that's 2 weeks down the line, and this looks like it's going to be 10 years. And what are for me, one of the things that made the difference is these town hall meetings that each program organized, that I thought were very successful. We just brought people together at first in person at the Simons when we could, and then pretty quickly online to ask them, how do you guys feel? Where is everyone? Are you interested in this workshop? And then as Vinod and Zvika already said, the response was very enthusiastic. So there's a lot of people for whom these programs were very important. So there's some postdocs and students who came as fellows, and they're there for the whole semester. And for them, this is really, it's a really important time in their career, and they're really looking forward to these talks and the interaction. And the response we got from them was extremely enthusiastic. They wanted it to happen, and they said, yes, let's have things online, let's have this workshop, let's just make it work. So I think after we did that, then it was clear that we should put the workshop on. And then, okay, then all the questions about that the other guys brought up about the difficulties with time zones, with speakers, that took a lot of effort. So for the quantum workshop that's happening this week, the main organizer is Henry Yuen, and he's put lots of effort coordinating with everyone, shuffling speakers based on time zones. Well, I don't know, Umesh, maybe you want to say something. I could say more about the workshop, but maybe Umesh, you want to say something.
Yeah, well, so we've already had 3 days of the workshop, and today is the last day. So I think it's been a great success. It's been, I would say it's well beyond my expectations going into it. And actually, there were times when we were thinking of a much briefer workshop, and as it turns out, it's actually been, many speakers stepped up to the plate, and I think the organizers did a great job getting everybody together. So it's actually been quite a pretty substantial workshop, and with a pretty large attendance, and a lot of excitement around it. So I think that's been a great success. I should say, just for perspective, I think it's been a great success. But there are a few things still about the in-person workshops that I miss, and maybe these are things that possibly could be addressed with more evolution of the Zoom or something. But there's just the person-to-person interactions in the coffee breaks and small groups, and this is something that obviously we cannot replace. But so if you were just doing asking the question, well, is this online format now a solution, or is it is it an alternative? I don't think we are there yet, but I think it's been such a great success for where we are and the circumstances we have been in. So that's.
Sorry, that's going to be my next question, but just commenting on what the two of you said, this idea of time is very interesting, because you're right. Like one day was, no, we all should be inside. Second day is we should only sit 4 seats apart from each other. Third day is only 10 people in the audience. Fourth day, okay, shelter at home. And you seem to get used to it extremely quickly. So it's okay. I guess maybe it's this gradual, it's the fact that it was not gradual, even though it's quick, but it was one, every day you get used to more and more. I agree with Umesh that the smaller groups are better, in person or not in person. And I noticed that as a panelist, I think I have maybe a little bit of a different feeling than someone who's watching, because I've participated in the Zoom in both ways. I wanted to see what it feels like. And as a panelist, there's this chat on the side where people are asking questions and somebody who knows the answer is answering, and even coming up with ideas. That's a very nice aspect, which I think on large numbers, would be hard to duplicate. So I agree with that.
Absolutely. I thought that was very nice in the lattice workshop, and I guess they're doing in the quantum workshop as well. So in the lattice workshop, I was in the panel, but this week, I'm, at least when I start off, I'm on the other side of the aisle. I sign in using the general public's link, and one thing that there's a big difference. In the sense that you have to sort of type in your questions. On the one hand, that forces you to sort of think a little bit more about what you're asking. On the other hand, for someone like me, I ask lots of questions. I ask fewer. when I have to type it in. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
I think people have said what works well, and are there any challenges? So I guess Umesh mentioned one challenge is there's no coffee breaks where you can sort of chit chat with people and get some sense of intimacy, which is a part of, I guess, any kind of social, any kind of collaboration, any kind of social interaction. I don't think Zoom could ever
Yeah,
that.
I agree. I think that I would go even further than what Umesh said. So it's absolutely spot on that, the coffee breaks not being there, not being able to run into people, that's a big downside. But even watching talks, I kind of like being in an auditorium with people around me, having the speaker in front of me. I think that there's something very human about this, being physically present, and maybe I'll get more used to it, but I don't like this whole let's do everything virtual, and I don't think it's any substitute at all. I mean, you meet people, there's like a bonding that happens, and it's really not the same in Zoom. In fact, this is one of the things that some of us talked about, that let's at least ask people to keep their videos on, and some folks did, and I think that helps a little bit. But I still think that that's a very big component that's missing from, but that's me. I mean, others might feel differently. I'm a very people's person, so I really like seeing my people in front of me. But yeah, I thought that was a big minus.
You're leading to the next question, really, which is such a success. Why do we have to ever be at the same place?
No.
No, I know. But on the success side, I must say that I think there are more participants in these workshops than we've had before. I think we had over 360 participants from 33 countries in the Lattice workshop. So we can identify that these are unique people participating. And apparently over 1,500 viewers on YouTube. I don't know exactly what's happening. We don't have the numbers yet for the quantum workshop, but it also seems to be way up there. Hi, Henry.
Hello.
So Henry, tell me, how is the quantum workshop going? I know you are like putting all your energy into it and have been sort of the lead organizer of it. So can you tell us how is it going?
I think it's going pretty well. Actually much better than I expected. So overall, I'm pretty happy about it. I think, the format and the medium has some challenges in terms, I think some people wish there was more socialization, but, I think, but during the talks, I think the interactions are pretty good. Yeah, maybe the schedule could, in terms of like how long the breaks are, it could have been worked out a little bit better, but overall, I'm pretty happy with it.
And, an interesting question is, given that it seems, at least for these two workshops, that we are broadening participation, how can we still maintain the socialization and get this type of audience to come? So people have already expressed the fact that they don't want to completely do away with in person, but there are some advantages, in particular reaching a wider audience. So I think an interesting question would be how to combine these formats.
Can I ask something? So when you usually do this, in usual times, can the remote participants ask questions? Can they interact? I didn't think they could, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, they cannot. Yeah,
they cannot. That makes a difference. I think that makes a significant difference. So we heard from a few people, at least a few people that normally wouldn't have made it in person to the workshop, but they participated remotely and actively.
I noticed that, at least in the Lattice workshop in the beginning, it was mostly the panelists who were asking questions. It's exactly those people you would think know the material. First of all, you realize they don't know the material, or at least they don't know all of it. And some things you would think would be, people would know. They ask a clarifying question. It's extremely helpful. Then you realize many people need this. And somehow, when you have to do this remotely, you do it, and the audience, people don't do it as much. I mean, I do, but I think most people are kind of shy away from it. They figure out eventually they'll understand. I think when you're on online, you don't think that you're going to eventually understand. If you're going to miss it now, you might kind of detach. So that's my feeling, that maybe even if you're in the audience and you're an organizer, if something looks unclear to you, maybe you could type it in and have it asked rather than ask it, you know, out loud. We've noticed at MIT years ago when they started having piazza, that a lot more women were participating in the Q&A. At that time, the thought was that they don't feel comfortable speaking up in class, but they do feel comfortable doing it online. So that ties in a little bit to this issue.
I think we can definitely tell that from the Q&A feature, who is asking questions on this during the seminars. There are often students who are asking a question. Yeah. Some of them we know, and you realize they're not typically the people who ask questions, and now suddenly they're asking many questions, and you see that the reason they're doing it is because it's easier. You're not, it's not feeling intrusive, and you're not. And then you get your answer, right? It's also nice that I like the feature that all the panelists see the answers, and some of them can also answer on behalf of the speaker, maybe if it's an easy answer, or there can be a little bit of a side discussion about the point that someone raises. And that helps a little bit recreate this community feeling where there can be a discussion among everyone. That's actually a better thing than a real life seminar where you can't really speak up, or you can't really speak to your neighbor. I mean, you can, but that's a little bit rude. Whereas now this is easy, so you can have a chat with other attendees while the seminar is going on. And I find that really, really useful, keeping engaged in the talk to be able to have this discussion at the time.
So maybe this is actually, I completely agree with what Thomas said. And maybe this is a little bit of a contrarian perspective, but I actually enjoyed the workshop, the virtual workshop, more than the real one. There was perhaps it's a function of my being on the panel. There was so much discussion among the panelists that I frankly don't think that level of discussion would have happened, to that extent, in a real workshop. Or maybe I'm missing something, but I really enjoyed it.
But it could be that, in fact, you could have that even if you're sitting in the audience, because in the sitting in the audience, I can ask somebody who's sitting next to me, what do they mean? What is X? But I can't ask it.
You cannot shout over you cannot shout.
Exactly. But if we had the format that we could type while we're sitting in the room, in lieu of speaking up, it would be useful. It seems to have been useful here. Also, you have to understand about the totally remote versus having something in place, is that if we didn't have those 2 months at Berkeley in the Institute, I don't think this would have happened. It was having these connections and knowing each other and kind of having the seminars and bantering and kind of knowing who the personalities are that allowed this very free exchange of ideas. I don't think this would have happened if we didn't have that feeling among us.
Maybe we should have the program in person in the workshops. Everyone goes to their home and kind of does.
Oh.
Well, I don't know, but I'm confident 100% that this would not have taken place if it wasn't this cohort of people who either know each other from before or actually were in the place and have debated these topics in the town halls, like Thomas said, were really crucial. Everybody standing there and kind of shouting their opinion, and it just felt like a community in lieu of other word. Okay, another thing I wanted to ask, sort of moving away from our particular workshops and this experiment, is obviously this is a tragedy on a scale that we have not experienced. Even my son was asking me, he said, so you've never seen anything like this? To him, I'm like the old woman on the hill. I said, no, not me, not my even people older than me. But in any case, it has also affected our community on other aspects, our own computer science community. And the kind of things that I'm thinking of is, school is out. I mean, it's remote, but a lot of people who kind of were using this time to get grades are not going to get grades. They're going to get pass fail. That's the least of one's trouble. But I know some students are troubled by that. In terms of the jobs that are going to be available for seniors and postdocs, I think it's not as good as it was, because we don't know essentially what's going to happen financially. There's hiring freezes that have been announced at certain universities. I think the first one was Stanford. There's projected economic shutdowns. There's health concerns for the future. People don't know what the outcome is. So what do you think about research? Do you see any challenges that are posed by this, or maybe opportunities? I mean, there's some new research questions that have come up, especially for the theory community. So I was wondering anything that you want to say about this.
So, I haven't seen any difference in research for myself, but I'm a little worried about sort of young people, because sort of part of if you're a beginning graduate student, part of research is to actually cultivate research relationships. You have to meet people. How do you meet people? You go to seminars, you go to work, right? I was talking to a student of mine yesterday, and Lisa, and she told me, I had this schedule before that she would wake up, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then she would sort of go to MIT. And when she walked into MIT, a switch turned on, and she was in research mode. And you go walk, get a cup of coffee or tea, you meet people, then you get into the mode. I think part of it was actually also sort of seeing your collaborators and your fellow students, and that's missing. And I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about sort of the younger generation of people.
Especially in the beginning, I guess.
In the beginning, yeah. I mean, because part of, a large part of my, grad school was actually hanging out with friends and, in very informal settings, and research would come up, because that's what we were all thinking about, and that's how research happened. And somehow I'm a little worried that that's not happening. It's not going to happen.
Interesting. Anybody else?
I guess one thing I've tried to do in the last couple of weeks is to have like a Zoom hangout for my students and people who are working with me, just to create some continuation of that social atmosphere. And it's like half of it is just chatting, and half of it is someone's giving some. It's like a half of a reading group or something like that, just to keep some science, but also some socialization. And I think that it seems like people have been enjoying that. Of course, it's no substitute for like being in person, but it's just some kind of maybe half measure to try to make up for the loss.
It's a very good idea. I've done it with some students on subset, and interestingly, in contrast with what Vinod said, some of them say, well, this is how I live all the time. What's the difference?
I had one student who said this, that I did the same as Henry. We were having this lunch together in front of the computers, and he said, well, this is great. I can finally be myself, which is this introverted person who likes to work from home and have quiet days. So he seemed pretty happy about it. Well, in general, it's true that it's challenging to switch from being at home mode to work mode for the students who live in not such big places, and so they don't have a room that's an office. And so a lot of them are getting creative solutions. They're moving their desks. They often share a house, and so they're putting their desks next to each other and creating a workspace where they can go there and be next to each other and feel that it's a bit like being in the office.
Yeah, I have to say that my experience of this has been, I used to be very resistant to using collaborating online with Zoom or Skype or something, because I found it very hard to, the fact that you can't write and so on, draw stuff. And now that I've done it, I find it very, actually, I find it extremely, it's a good way of collaborating. It allows you to focus, and if you have a tablet, you can even write and sketch. And my general feeling about this period is that it's evolutionary pressure. That it's something that's come up, and it's making us all evolve. I feel like I'm going from being a dinosaur in this respect to moving on to the next stage, and I feel that this is true in multiple dimensions. As a community, we've resisted online instruction and teaching, and I think that those barriers are going to come down dramatically. And I think I'm a bit of an optimist, so I feel that this is going to pass in a few months, but what it's going to leave in its wake is a lot of new you know, and more efficient ways of doing things and more effective ways of doing things. You know, both in terms of research, because you know, the more we collaborate, you know, widely, you know, without geographical constraints, the more it democratizes research, and I think that's a great thing. And then in terms of teaching, I think it's you know, online tools are going to help us focus more on what learning and teaching is about, as opposed to the repetitive aspects of it. So I actually view this as you know, in a more positive way.
One thing to remember though is I know that I have a student with a little child at home where both parents are working. That's tough.
Oh yeah. Because
having to take care of someone who wants attention 24/7, and then also focus means you have to compromise. I mean, anyway, you have to do that when who's taking care, right? But that's tough. So
I think that's true. There are a lot of people who are in very difficult situations here.
Yeah,
exactly. We need to keep in mind a lot of people, both in our community and of course in general, are facing, you know, difficulties that are not related to research life, but related to, you know, actual living life in terms of job concerns, children, health, of course, family members, and so on. And I think a part of our dealing with the situation is to actually sort of being aware that people are going to be concerned, people are going to be distracted, and I think we need to sort of enable that to that extent, and be minded to the situation, and not sort of lose context. So we're trying a lot of things to sort of keep research going, and I think this is good, and this is giving support. I think this is sort of emotionally supporting a lot of us, I think, sort of being able to do what we think we know how to do. But again, we have to sort of keep in mind that it's not always possible, and sort of give people who have more hardship also sort of way to deal with it without being feeling that they should be, you know, working on research even when they can't.
But I think that this is doing it, and it's interesting what you brought up, Zvika, that this human part, even though we're doing it remotely, you all of a sudden see the circumstances that people are in. You know, maybe a child will go by, and since you're in the same situation, you're also locked at home. I feel more empathetic to it. It's like, okay. And as people seem more willing to accept the fact that somebody may have a different pace than you do, it might take them more time. That's the sense that I get, rather than just judging someone by a productivity or an idea that they bring. You know, there's more context to how that emerges, which brings some more patience, I hope.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just going to say, another side of this is that we're getting to know our colleagues in sort of more intimate ways than we're used to. So when we're having these faculty meetings where typically everyone is in the same room and dressed in the suits, now people are in their garage or in their kid's bedroom or hugging their cat on the couch. You can see that creates a very different atmosphere in, I think, a positive way, because it's a little bit, you know, it's human. It's what Shafi was saying. It's getting to know and respecting everyone's constraints and the life that they're having on the.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was going to say. That I think this kind of a situation, it brings us closer, because, you know, you cannot sort of ignore the personal life. You cannot separate it completely from the professional life anymore. And now when we talk to people, you know, it's very natural to find out how their families are doing, who's in their family, where they live, what's going on, you know, did they eat, what did they, stuff like that. So I think that it's definitely brought a sense of closeness within the community. And this is something that perhaps every crisis does. It's one of the upsides of a difficult time like this.
Absolutely. So I guess the other part of my question was, there are some research questions that come up. Maybe this is not the right format because we're talking about resilience in this interview, But there's definitely, I know in the cryptography side, there's questions about contact tracing, you know, where does liberty, when we talk about privacy, we're always talking about it's sort of clear who the bad guys are, people trying to take our privacy away. But now, you know, the issues are really health, life and death versus privacy. It's a much more delicate situation and maybe more fundamental. So we have to understand where are the privacy concerns come in, and utility maybe is reduced, or maybe you can get both. And that's what we are hoping. That's what we've been advocating for a long time. And the question is whether in this situation that's really true and how to do it efficiently. There's lots of other questions in theoretical computer science. I know sort of computational epidemiology is a field. There are very interesting questions, even small questions, you know. How do you make sure that everybody can walk 6 feet apart when they leave the house? It's an unsolved question, but certainly an algorithmic question. Anybody else with questions that have come up? I mean, there's tons that I have, but I'm not going to list them.
Well, a colleague from India wrote to me because he's trying to get them to do pooling for tests. You know, instead of doing tests for COVID-19 one at a time, you take many people's samples together and do one test. So you deal with the fact that you know, with the scarcity of tests. And so there were questions there about, well, how do you do this when you know, well, first he had questions about what's the best algorithm, and then I could point him to the literature. But then there were questions about, well, these tests are not very reliable, and then what can you do with that, and so on. So it was, there are actually, as you said, a lot of interesting questions that come out of, you know, where one can actually potentially make a difference.
In Weizmann, I think it's Zvika, right? There was a faculty meeting where like 8 faculty came up and talked about what they're doing that is connected with coronavirus. Mostly theory.
A lot of our faculty, both in the computer science and math, and also, of course, in other departments at Weizmann, are really sort of harnessing all the sort of tools and knowledge that they have towards this. Whether it is so we heard from people from the chemistry department on trying to find molecules that inhibit the reproduction of the specific viruses, and people from biology who are helping to conduct tests at higher volume than was possible before, and people in our departments in various aspects, some, like you said, in trying to sort of get large amounts of data and sort of try to analyze it in order to sort of predict trends using sort of statistical tools combined with computational biology tools in order to sort of predict trends before they appear on the surface. There's issues of privacy that are being addressed by people at Weizmann. And fairness, of course, trying to sort of use tools like fairness in order to sort of derive insights about this virus based on information that we have about other types of sicknesses. Yeah, and a lot of signal processing in order to try to get better imaging and radiology to do that more efficient and more streamlined. I hope I'm not forgetting. So really trying to apply a variety of tools and try to sort of help in various aspects of this situation. So I think in many cases, people discovered that these things that they were thinking about in the context of their research all of a sudden can be useful also to benefit humanity. And I think this is also something that's really encouraging to see that you know, this thing that we are part of, academia and science in general, can, you know, of course the contribution of science to humanity is something that is not, I think, in dispute, but even in this situation, people can sort of shift really quickly from working on theory or things that are more abstract to applying it to this specific situation. So I think a lot of people at Weizmann are sort of harnessing their abilities to this effort.
Great. I guess we're almost done with the hour. I think it is actually an hour. I just wanted to say sort of on that we're trying to keep up social events up at Simons, like game nights. Surprisingly, the students are organizing game nights where they do these online games with all of them participating. I haven't participated in that yet. On the other hand, I don't also participate in the real life game night. This daily tea, I haven't been to one of them. How is that going? Anybody been there? We have that every day.
Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've been a few times. I think they've been nice. So it's a small number of people coming, but it's 7-8 people chatting, you know, on their couch for half an hour. We've been using it to update each other on, you know, who's flying back on what day and how things are at home and the kind of things that you were asking me at first, like how do you guys find food and does there have enough toilet paper and how are the kids and these things. I think they're nice. So they continue a little bit the informal interactions that we had at the Simons. It's a bit of a challenge because everyone's day now is different and there's not the cookies to attract people. But I think that for some fraction of the participants, it's a valuable thing to have because really the program at the Simons is an important part of their quarter, and if that program ends, then it feels very lonely. And so it's I think they're nice. They've been working out nicely, just as a social thing to have.
Yeah, we have to make sure that now that the workshops are going to be over. I mean, there are going to be 2 more workshops that we still have something that happens during the week that has some kind of punch to it. You know, that people want to join. We had a women's, just as an ending, we had a women's party where all the women from both programs in lattices and quantum participated. And I thought it was a great meeting.
Yeah, definitely. It was really nice.
Everybody talked about themselves and shared something about themselves in general, not just related to the coronavirus. So with this sense of community, I want to thank everyone for what you've done, and let's keep going. And on one more note of optimism, we are definitely going to run a program for both the lattices and the quantum, and hopefully at the same time in the future to make up for those 2 months that we've missed out. So in my mind, it would be great if it happened next summer, to the extent that people can come, that they would spend some significant amount of time at Berkeley, and we will definitely support it on the Simons side. And then we could actually be in the same room and have cookies. Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Shafi.
Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.